Welcome to Gray Areas for September 16th, 2025, episode 690. Cody is here. Dave is here. I am here. I sound like crap, but I feel fine. But I'm going to be a little stuffy today, so I'm sorry, especially for all the listeners out there. And Sean is working. So it's just the three of us. And I know you see the word basketball on the screen, and I don't want you to freak out. It isn't about basketball at all, even though it involves basketball teams and players. It's about journalism and billionaires being potentially very sneaky and a bunch of other interesting drama. So don't tune out just because you saw the word basketball or the name of the episode. It's going to be okay.
I mean, it would have been, you could put the headline as just Pandora's box opened, ? Because the implications of all this is kind of crazy, isn't it? Like, if they want to, they could really start investigating everybody. And we'll get into it, but like, this could be a crazy thing to investigate everybody. Of course, we all know this is going to happen. They're going to be like, yeah, I think they were one bad apple, and they're going to slap them on the wrist, and that's going to be the end of it. But I'm kind of putting the cart before the horse here.
A little bit. Like the whole cart before the whole horse.
Yes.
Now, Dave is on location in LA because he wanted to get to the bottom of this. He wanted to get as close to Kawhi as possible, even though I don't even know if Kawhi spends his off seasons there, but regardless.
I don't think anyone knows where Kawhi spends any time at all.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, for all I know, Kawhi goes back to his home planet during the offseason. That wouldn't surprise me at all, honestly, at this point.
We should probably summarize what the story is about, especially because a lot of our listeners are not necessarily fans of basketball or the NBA and may not have heard about this at all. Do one of you feel up to the task, or do you want me to try and stumble my way through it?
I would have you do it, and I will chime in at the end if there's anything I actually think you have a better grasp on it than I do, as much as I've tried to take a bunch of it in. I think you might have a better outline than me right now.
All right, I will go into it, even though my voice is trash.
Sorry.
Do the best I can.
Fun.
So let's get to the brass tacks of it, and we'll probably fill in some of the details as we go along and talk about the aspects of this. Ultimately, on, almost 2 weeks ago, I think it was September 3rd, Pablo Torre, who has a podcast called Pablo Torre Finds Out, former Around the Horn guy, has been on a bunch of different ESPN platforms over the years, since split off with a company founded by Dan Le Batard and is kind of doing his own thing now. He puts out an episode of his show with a couple of guests who are basically coming in blind to a stack of papers. Like, I don't remember the number, but it was like 3,000 plus or something. They talked about how many trees he might have killed to compile this information and what the carbon footprint of that might have looked like. That's important. Stay with it. We'll get back to it. And he's revealing to the two of them, one, a former Suns exec who is also just kind of inside NBA circles, and another, like a former guy who is really steeped in legalese. So he's familiar with these type of contracts and these dealings that big sports teams might have in these situations. And Pablo effectively reveals, we're going to jump into the end, but again, we'll fill in all the details. It'll be interesting, I promise, that it looks as though all of this is still alleged. The NBA has started an investigation. Nothing has been proven, to be very clear up front, that Kawhi Leonard, the Clippers superstar, may have accepted a $28 million endorsement from a company called Aspiration and did absolutely nothing to earn said endorsement. Aspiration is a company that looks like one of those really tech-friendly startups that promise to plant a bunch of trees and save the environment. And they got like Robert Downey Jr. to sign on. They paid him, I think, like $5 million, and he did some voiceover stuff and a couple of video appearances. There's some other celebrities involved. But Kawhi Leonard gets an amount of money that dwarfs all of them, almost all of them combined. And as Pablo's going through these stacks of papers and allowing people to sort of come up to speed with him along the journey, one of the things that he reveals that leaves the guy who's familiar with legalese aghast is the terms that basically say, yeah, we'd like you to do an 8-hour appearance here or up to 5 social media likes, but all of them are followed by the comma and then the clause, unless it conflicts with your beliefs, which basically gives the client, in this case Kawhi Leonard, the ability to go, I don't really feel it. I don't know if I'm going to do that. And there's no record of Kawhi ever having done anything on behalf of Aspiration. There's a couple of posts from Aspiration themselves and one from the Clippers that mention him, but no likes, no retweets, no anything from Kawhi Leonard. There also might have been $20 million in stock options. So it's about $48 million in compensation, allegedly, for Kawhi Leonard just out of the goodness of the company's own heart, apparently. Except around the same time, Clippers owner Steve Ballmer committed $50 million to this startup company aspiration. At one point, they were looking at a $300 million arrangement and possibly stadium naming rights for what eventually became the Intuit Dome, where the Clippers play, the high-tech stadium that's got that like fancy wall. If you haven't seen it and you even like sports at all for some reason, go check it out. It is kind of cool. Like they can measure the biometrics of fans in a certain section to make sure they're cheering loud enough. There's some Big Brother stuff there too, but we won't talk about it. And then a few days after that, other details start emerging. Former aspiration leaders talk about how the finances never really made sense of this arrangement, and they sign a statement to Pablo Torre backing up what a Boston outlet had revealed a couple days before, that they were essentially told that this was to circumvent the NBA salary cap. That's where the crux of this comes in. I don't want to talk for too long and go into too much, so we won't circle back to it. But either one of two things is true. Either Steve Ballmer, the seventh richest man in the world, is an oblivious but lovable idiot who threw money into a garbage disposal to get nothing back. But to be fair, Aspiration, its leaders were rung up on fraud, and the company went bankrupt, which is why all of this came to light in the first place, because the company went under, and all of its files were then disclosed and allowed to be picked through to this manner. Or Steve Ballmer used outside compensation, directly or indirectly, to woo Kawhi Leonard to stay with the Clippers. This doesn't sound like much other than sounding absurd, but remember, like we talked about with sports betting on a number of episodes in this show, competitive integrity is king in the major sports of this country. All sports, but especially the major sports, because without competitive integrity, you don't have a league. If the small town markets like in OKC can't think that they're on equal footing with the LAs and the New Yorks, you don't have a league. So that's why all of this matters. There's more details I haven't even mentioned yet, but I don't want to monopolize everything. How did I do so far?
That's pretty the basics of what is necessary to understand everything else that you'll now lead. Well, I guess we'll lead into. I don't think I have much to want to chime in on that rundown, because the rest of it is circumstances like of like this to this to this to the type of thing. Because again, the details of like Kawhi's free agency and all that isn't really relevant to all of this. Again, we could get into Kawhi and his uncle and the weirdness in general of what Kawhi's demands or family's demands and things like that were when he was a free agent is all off to the side of this in terms of how guilty is he for what his family's up to or he's up to. That's over here. The point, what you're approaching, is the journalism side of it and the competitive integrity of a league and how it really polices itself is over here. And so I don't think the rest of this, I mean, that's almost the end of it in terms of Kawhi specifically in a way from what actually matters here, I think.
It makes me think of, I mean, the initial thing I thought of all this was the Patriots spying tapes controversy that occurred, because I absolutely refused to call it Spygate, so, because that's dumb. The idea is, yeah, a billionaire in a highly competitive industry in which there are rigid rules that hamper someone with power and money decided to bend the rules. It doesn't surprise me in any way, assuming that the allegations are true. It doesn't surprise me at all. It doesn't make me think that, oh, wow, I can't believe someone would do this. And then it makes me think, where else is this happening and what else is occurring elsewhere?
Which is the best point, and it's what I'll get into now or later or whatever, that is some of the approach with some people who have covered it so far are like, well, yeah, no shit, this happens all over the league, and they're downplaying it in the sense of, I'll just go right into it. Bill Simmons has been really pissing me off specifically because he keeps saying, well, I know these things, and we've heard whispers of this for years. It's like, and well, what if when a team's owner lets their player, one of their star player, use their private jet, and why isn't that an impermissible benefit, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, okay, so there's a rule in place. Never mind the fact that, as you guys as Suns fans know, there's a very harsh cap now, more than there used to be, and the punishment of how much you're paying a guy, blah, blah, blah. And then there is the whole, well, if they already gave Kawhi the max anyways, he couldn't get more money from anybody else than from the Clippers, then why would he go there? I'm like, well, he could have been a dick and said, I'm going to go take less money somewhere else for a better situation, winning-wise, so you need to make sure you give me as much as humanly possible. That argument has really been pissing me off, of like, just because they were the team who could keep him for the most money, and other teams might give players impermissible benefits or shit like that, but Jason Concepcion said this on Simmons' podcast. It was one of the only takes I didn't get angry at while listening to this podcast was, if you're going to be the law and you're going to say, we have a second apron, it's very crucial that you guys follow this. We want to curb spending. We want to cut down on all this crap. Well, you motherfuckers better have to like police it then. Having laws that you don't police is not having laws. So to Dave's point is, if this ends up with a slap on the wrist or whatever, and if there is a bunch of this going on in the background for other teams, where are we about to get to in the NBA with all of this? Because if you want to go free reign and say, well, you know, honestly, you could just write this into guys' contracts that you can give them perks and this and that outside the salary cap, then why do we have the second apron in the first place? Like, if you're going to just turn away from these type of things.
Isn't this exactly, like, to me, this feels exactly like what just happened in college sports, college football specifically, where it's like, guys, we've been paying players under the table for the last 30 years. Why can't we just do it over the table now? And it shows that no matter what set of rules you establish, because now everyone's talking about college sports needing a collective bargaining agreement because of NIL and all the things that are happening there. Well, okay, there is a collective bargaining agreement here. There is a specific agreement made between all these teams, and yet someone's skirting it. That will always happen. So it really emphasizes the need for oversight, auditing. Maybe that's just me with my job being an auditor. I don't know. But like, it emphasizes the need for these types of things and a level of oversight to make sure that shit like this doesn't occur as it continues, as we move forward in a competitive environment.
That was what was most interesting to me as a show topic. I think there's plenty of legs to this story, and we haven't even touched on half of it yet. So, like, don't worry, we're going to get there. But, like, I'm a journalist. It's kind of been my career for 20 years. Cody's a journalist. Kind of been his career for, what are we going on, almost 15 now?
Off and on for, I guess, 14, yeah.
Yeah. Dave's an auditor. So he's got more of the financial side of things, but he is certainly familiar with, not to this scale, but like big deals and movie money moving around and like, you know. And Sean also was a journalist for a while. Like, everybody on this show can connect with this story in one way or another, in addition to it being about a very prominent NBA player and us all being sports and basketball fans. So we can kind of talk about it from our own individual perspectives. I don't talk a ton about journalism, in part because a lot of what I would talk about, I'm not going to say would get me fired, but like if it's sensitive to my job specifically, I'm not going to air out dirty laundry about what I do on a regular basis on here. But I do think there's an important discussion to be had about the value of the journalism here. We'll get to that after we talk about the specifics of like Kawhi and all the movings on. But like that to me was one of my main takeaways, was like everybody thought that this was a breath of fresh air. And it's like, yeah, because we really have fallen pretty far with journalism, at least in the mainstream. I'm not saying this because I run a small town paper, but in general, the work that's being done at that level is ignored because it's all about MSNBC and Fox News and the New York Times and the big stuff. But when I looked at all this, to the point that you guys both made, it's important that these stories came to light so that we can at least have these discussions and figure out what this is supposed to look like going forward. And that's largely because of Pablo Torre and his work. He said he spent 7 months on this. So when people accused him of kind of milking the episode and stretching it out, because it's like an hour 20, probably doesn't need to be that much. But guess what? He worked for 7 months on it. So to get any kind of return on investment, it's going to have to get stretched out, have a few reveals for drama, maintain that engagement. Like, it was going to have to happen. I don't begrudge him that at all.
I think it's interesting because you kind of point out, and you're getting into the sports journalism investigative side, which we've been severely lacking for a couple years now. The death of Deadspin, or at least the death of Deadspin in the manner it was, thank you, Hulk Hogan, and the dumb people that were at Deadspin and some of the stupid shit they did do, to be fair. Well, we lost that. Grantland was doing a really good job of this when it was under Simmons, funny enough, at ESPN, and the Ringer never really recaptured that. I don't think the market was there for it anymore for long form, 3,000, 5,000 word journalistic pieces. But we lost those two web entities, I guess, pretty close together for the most part in the mid 2010s. And we've never had any form of that really since. Again, I talked to Chris about it. It was funny, off the show. It was, I listened to Pablo Torre when he was at ESPN Daily because he ran the ESPN Daily podcast. Two of my favorite people at ESPN I like to listen to, Mina Kimes and him, were running that podcast for a long time before they've gone on to do better things for their career. Like, honestly, that was a form of doing some investigation stuff. They broke some stuff down. That goes into, they were digging into off the top of my head, the player that was at one of the college San Jose State, I think, that may or may not have been transgender, and that people were, fighting that back. And that was something that ESPN was doing. Now, it wasn't the most popular thing they had, but that podcast existed and was doing some work off to the side that was really fun to listen to. 30 minutes, 45 minutes, really tight podcasts. And we lost that even in the last couple of years when Pablo decided to leave ESPN and move on. And there is just a massive lack of anyone looking into this stuff. And now Pablo keeps doing it. And it's funny the pushback we're getting in some ways where I'm like, you all, and again, the really big media sports thing is, shit, all the entities that could do some investigative stuff are all contracted with the leagues to show their games now. And that is the massive conflict of interest that exists in sports journalism, exists in journalism in general at times with entities you cover and advertising and all that type of stuff. And it gets really messy.
It's what happens when you consolidate into conglomerates. And it's really funny, paradoxically, of what I think of like the idea of like the need for oversight, the need for journalism, all the things that I mentioned about a need to keep integrity also runs afoul with the fact of the cost of doing that, of being able to provide and staying in code, staying in and being able to provide that oversight properly costs a lot. So small ventures have a really difficult time meeting those requirements the more you have, which then lends itself to have conglomerates who can afford that type of thing, which then turns into not having proper. It's a freaking spiral that we've run into, and this is getting outside the Kawhi stuff, but it's a big issue in society of where we go, the more centralized, the more uniform we become and where we get our information and how we interact with one another. The fact that we have, a lot of people in this country get their news from two sources, they get X is a huge provider of information to people, news to people. It's then you have the TV cable news and stuff like that. It's just really hard to imagine the need to have all these independent outlets. And I'm glad someone like Pablo Torre did this, because he has the background to do it and clearly had the financial backing to do it, or his own financial backing to do it. And he's going to reap the benefits of it, I think, over time. But it's an existential question I don't know the answer for.
There's always going to be an imbalance of power when money is involved. So we understand that from the get-go, the system is sort of stacked in one direction. You can only become an owner of a team if you have a pretty large amount of money in the first place. That gets you into the club of very rich, usually white owners. And this isn't even just in the NBA. This is across all the major sports. So like from the start, you're sort of self-selecting into a group that's going to have certain interests in mind that they can share over what might be best for the whole. And I think we've seen that to a certain extent with Mark Cuban's voracious defense of Steve Ballmer. Cuban's no longer the majority owner of the Mavericks. He still owns 27%, as he said about 400 times in his appearance on Pablo Torre's podcast. But he's not in charge anymore. He didn't trade Luka, but he's still around. He was very prominent in the 2000s and the 2010s. Obviously, the Shark Tank stuff, whatever. He may come at this from a perspective where it's like, yeah, I have some insight on this. Let me reveal some of the behind the scenes about why this might happen. Or if you're a cynic, he might be trying to help cover for one of his other rich buddies because they can owe each other favors and because they don't want to dig into what Mark Cuban may have done. Because all of a sudden now you look at this harsh spotlight that is brought upon himself largely, and you look back at Dirk Nowitzki's below-market deal that he signed around 2010, and you go, now wait a minute, like how come you were making like $25 million below the minimum? Was it just because he was trying to help the team and it was a team-friendly contract? Or did something happen under the table there? And I'm not saying something did, and I'm not worried about legal repercussions even if I did say something like that. All I'm saying is sports ownership is already a very, very cliquey group that very few people on this planet will ever experience. So it's not shocking to see people circle the wagons and go, no, it's not really that big a deal. It's fine. It's probably nothing. Don't worry about it. It's like, You have given us a lot of reasons to worry about it.
It's specifically why, and I think a couple of podcasts and shows have gotten into it, why forcing the Clippers sale in the first place from Sterling was kind of shocking, because it takes a lot for owners to turn on each other. They all got dirt on each other. They're all shady in their own ways. They sit there behind their closed doors with their commissioner, who's basically their employee, and say this and that. It's like, so we take a look at Adam Silver. It's like, oh, well, Silver needs to come down on the Clippers. It's like, he needs to come down on one of his 30 bosses. It's a bizarre fucking system that exists because the commissioner's not an independent party. He's on the ownership side. I think some people in some realms have always thought like, oh, the commissioner is like, he bridges the gap between the two. He's above both of them, and that's the cross section. It's like, no, he's above the owner specifically. It's why the Patriots, a team I like, probably got away with some shit in the NFL as well, because, well, one of the most staunch supporters of Roger Goodell was typically the Patriots ownership. And so that's just, again, to Chris's point of just how ownership works, and Cuban and this, you're protesting a lot and you're really coming out hard against it. And it makes you wonder, it's like, to the point that there's Simmons, or, I think Zach Lowe's made the same point of, well, this might be happening anyway. And it's like, can we stop with the just because it fucking happens, it must be okay, it's not that big of a deal? It's like, that fucking excuse in our society drives me crazy, because it's like, you guys accept this, you accept that, you make concessions here and there of breaking the rules, and it's like, well, where do you draw the line? And again, it's why I think it's funny that Simmons, of all people, wants to come out and be like, this isn't that big of a deal, as a Patriots fan who bitched and moaned endlessly when his team was mistreated or whatever it might have been, and now he's just sitting back being like, yeah, but everyone does this, LeBron gets to fly around all the time, and it's like, so maybe we should use this as the opportunity to rein some of that in?
And by the way, just for quick context, a couple things. Bill Simmons was not a big fan of Pablo Torre a few months ago when Torre did a story about former Patriots coach Bill Belichick and his girlfriend, who's like a third his age, and a lot of the weirdness going on there. He called that out as not real journalism, had Pablo on his show, and they talked it out. And I'm not the biggest Simmons guy anymore. I liked him 20 years ago, but he showed his ass.
Yeah.
Like, Pablo made him look bad in that. So could that be a factor here?
I think
is the fact that Bill Simmons is a Clippers season ticket holder a factor here? I think he would be objective enough to that wouldn't be it. But again, you look at all the factors that add up. And one other thing, James Dolan is the perfect example of this. For the people listening who don't know who that is, that's the Knicks owner. Largely regarded as a penny pincher, an asshole, frequently the one vote in 29-1 votes among the owners against certain changes that the league might be going through. You best believe if they had any dirt against him, that's the type of guy the owners might jettison. Like they had to with Donald Sterling, the former Clippers owner, because he got caught on tape saying horrifically racist things. James Dolan is still the owner of the New York Knicks. It's a good old boys club until you do something so atrocious that they have to kick you out. Their hands are tied. So it's really tough to take anything that Cuban says without a major grain of salt, because fair or not, you have to question whether their organization or other organizations did the same thing.
Isn't that the point of the commissioner, though? Like you mentioned that he's basically the employee of the 30 owners, which is very true. But the point of the commissioner's office is to represent the better overall interests of the combined league, not a single owner, not a group of owners, not the short-term desires of all the owners. It is the idea of what Chris talked about at the very beginning about integrity being king. The idea that, oh, hey, all these owners want this good boys club where they can do these under the table deals and let these other guys go because everybody does it, so therefore it's okay. That's the whole point of the commissioner's office, is to ensure that these things don't happen. And which is why people lauded Silver so much more when he kicked out Sterling, was, hey, this is a bad look for all of us. And yes, things Sterling did were so egregious that they had to, like his hand was forced. But that came out decisive and quick. Yeah. That wasn't anything, oh, we're going to do an investigation, we're going to look at this. It was, yeah, he's an asshole. We've known he's an asshole. This is the smoking gun. Let's get him out of here. Now, this is what we need from Silver, is to have a thorough investigation. And we are not only investigating the Clippers, we are investigating the entirety of the league because of the integrity that we desire as a sports league. That's not going to happen, I don't think. And that's my skepticism coming through. But I think, like I said in the very beginning, I think they're going to look at the Clippers and say, yeah, they broke some rules. Here you go. And that's it. And it's going to be we're going to need another Pablo Torre, 29 other Pablo Torres, right?
And the role of the commissioner from like the 1970s and 80s of pro sports and today's role of the commissioner is so different. There's so much more money involved, and this has become such a capitalistic thing of TV deals and all of that. And I agree with you. I mean, it's funny because we joke about that. Like, well, the commissioner of a fantasy football league, for example, is supposed to be impartial and make sure all the rules are all equal and the league is fair and all that bullshit. That's what the job and the definition of a commissioner is. And commissioners in pro sports now sure feel like their job is to make sure that their 30 or 32 bosses make as much money as possible and that franchise values go up as much as possible. Because I'm right with you, Dave.
But there's nothing inherently wrong. But there's nothing inherently wrong with that if you're doing it in the long-term greater interest of all of them. But in this case, that's not it.
And that's the question and the wonder is anyone who's a fan of any of the other teams should probably look at this and be mad, or then have egg on their face if their team's also doing it. But as a fan, you probably should be mad. The NBA is probably banking on fans not giving a shit and saying, well, it's two different rich entities. We don't really give a shit. And because, again, fans weirdly side with ownership more than players. I've never understood it. I never get it. You get mad that the players are rich because they're just rich because they just get to play basketball. I'm like, I'm going to be honest, at least they have talent. Most of these owners inherited their wealth, so let's not pretend like a lot of them are good at fucking anything other than they're a white man that was born. Congratulations to you.
There are some racist undertones to some of that, but anyways, go ahead.
Exactly, it's true. And in terms of fans and players and stuff, and so I'm worried that the NBA is going to try and sit there and be like, well, as long as no one really cares and there's no real outcry, which is why I'm wondering if Pablo's going to keep dropping episodes. And we were texting about it in our group message of, is Pablo doing this the pretty ingenious way of, here's some breadcrumbs on it, a little bit out, and then everyone talks a bunch of shit, says, Pablo, you're full of shit, blah, blah. Oh, Pablo drops another podcast, which is what happened. And Chris very hilariously texted us like, oh, shit, he's got some more to it. We don't know how many more things he'll have going forward. Again, he's done very good work between the weird Belichick stuff and then the NFL Players Union. And by the way, he's not anti-owner. He just took a giant shit on the NFL Players Union for weeks and weeks about how badly and corrupt their situation was. He's just out here fucking pointing out how fucked the system is in multiple leagues. He's not biased towards one way or the other here.
This is one of the things I'm most excited about, though, that you just touched on, is from my perspective as a guy who's been in newspapers for 20 years now, which, boy, it is refreshing in a weird way to see the rapidness of the news cycle used in the benefit of the news cycle. Because typically what happens for people who aren't as familiar with journalism is we're expected to have the story as quickly as possible, get it online immediately, because people want news right away. And obviously, as newspapers, as television stations, radio stations, whatever, our goal is to get that out as quickly as possible, but also to vet it, to put it through the proper paces so we don't have another example like the Boston Marathon bombing where Reddit found a suspect and it turns out, oh, no, that person wasn't involved at all. Whoops, you got them arrested and hurt and So there's a whole process to it. And then when you do that, people consume that quickly, if they do it at all, and then they move on. What happened here was, because he paced it out, like Cody said, now it's, okay, here's this bombshell. I'm going to wait and see how people respond to it. And when they do, I'm going to use other stuff that I have, plus the ammunition I just gained from their responses to it, and I'm going to fire another bombshell. And then they're going to have to respond to it, because that's the tendency of the 24/7 news cycle. I have to respond. Like we're not going to talk about Charlie Kirk on this show this week, but when Charlie Kirk was killed last week, everybody had to put out a statement. Every politician in the state of Arizona did, because he had Arizona ties. So quickly, you have to respond to everything in a tight window. And it's the first time I've really seen somebody like Torre take the system and be like, all right, I know this news cycle is the way it is. It's hungry. It eats constantly. How about I use it to my advantage for once? That's actually kind of neat. It's a unique perspective I have on it, but the fact that it's even possible tells me, okay, maybe we reevaluate the way we drip out content at times, or how we deal with engagement, because there's other ways to use it that we may not have foreseen in this constantly ever devouring, endlessly scrolling news cycle.
There's some skill to it, right? With Pablo and his team being able to predict what people might respond. He puts it out. He's going to think he's kind of also has been through this a couple times. Puts it out. People shit on it. Say, here's the holes. Here's the holes. Ballmer goes on ESPN and has a fucking cushy bullshit interview. And then Pablo's like, okay, well, I kind of knew that was coming, so I'm going to withhold a little bit of evidence and then decide, here's the evidence. It's in a funny way. It's like almost adjudicating a case in a way, although you can't really do surprise evidence in trials. That's actually not how it works, funny enough. But the way the public would imagine a trial would work, and it's like, here's the smoking gun, or here's the big surprise witness. And it's like, he's kind of approaching it that way from an entertainment cycle perspective, and it's pretty ingenious, honestly.
Yeah. And the thing I appreciate the most about it is it's principled. Like you mentioned the fact of how he's not owner side or player side or anything like that. Principled and integrity and ingenuitive is what we need nowadays. Like, I know you didn't want to go deep into like Charlie Kirk or anything, but like the idea of like someone celebrating that hurts me from a principled standpoint. No matter how much you hate the guy, like celebrating it feels wrong to me, and that's a principled stance for me. So the idea that Pablo Torre is like, hey, this is an injustice in the system in which we've created, and I'm going to report on it. And then in order to make sure that my point is made and I don't get swept under the rug or beaten down by the greater powers that be, I'm going to be ingenuitive about it and make sure that my points last long to continue this. It's brilliant. It's what we need more of as we go into this, like I mentioned, this conglomerate, this centralized type of thing where people control power in the middle.
And to your point, this is something that I know intuitively because I've done this for 2 decades, and Cody knows and Sean knows. There is obviously a certain journalistic procedure that is required because we hold ourselves to a standard, because we are holding the powerful to account. To do so, we have to be extremely thorough. We have to dot our I's and cross our T's, so that when Pablo reports this story for 7 months and then comes forward with this information, you know he has worked all of his sources and looked at the documentation and is comfortable enough to share this information in a public forum that holds him, as well as the people it involves, to the highest level of scrutiny. So I do think some of this is calculated by him. I also think some of this is just him continuing to get information. One of the things we've noticed over the years at the paper is that sometimes you can't get people to respond. You want to get them on the record. You want to get their side of a story. You want to get their quotes on there. And they just won't respond. They give you the runaround. They don't have time. They just don't get something together in time. And then you put out a story, and all of a sudden, people start getting really eager to talk, because now the story's gone out without their involvement in the narrative, and all of a sudden they go, well, wait a minute. No, I want to at least say this. I want to make this clear. So I do think some of this is also unintentional, or at least he could have planned for the thought of more coming in, but wouldn't have known for sure. And then he gets more information in, and he's able to use that, but he also has to hold it to the same scrutiny and vet it all and double and triple check it. So, for example, he had 7 aspiration sources in his first report, all unwilling to go on the record, in part because, well, the FTC and whatever other acronym holds these places accountable, had an active investigation into them and found them liable for fraud. So I wouldn't want to go on the record either. Totally understandable. One of them actually went on the record and did speaking for the episode with voice modulation. That's the thing we don't have to consider for print, obviously. That's a different thing. We do sometimes grant anonymity for people who are afraid of reprisal, so it's not unheard of. And people then question, including Mark Cuban, well, who are these 7 people? They're probably like nobodies. Maybe they have their own axe to grind, which, again, could be true. Everybody has skin in the game. So in the second episode, Torre's like, okay, well, a second person agreed to go on the record, and this was like the director of finance. So you're going to have a hard time saying that they're a nobody when this company was bankrupted and then found liable for fraud. The director of finance might have some insight that's valuable for that and isn't a nobody. All of this is to say, this stuff is not as simple as it seems on the surface, and that's not me trying to be like, oh, journalism's hard, you guys. You don't understand. But a lot more goes on than just that hour and 20-minute episode, which is such a weird sentence to say. So much work went into that hour and 20 minutes that you guys don't even understand if you're not familiar with journalism. That's all I can say.
7 months.
Yeah.
I mean, jeez.
I was going to say, Chris, for example, in the role I currently work at, where Chris and I work together, I actually have the freedom to occasionally look into 400-page documents and sort some stuff out. Sometimes that comes out, and I've written off of multiple hundreds of pages of court documents and things like that. I have written a story that's like, 800 words. That's all, but I have to go through every single little bit of it and double check it. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, I'm getting the same answer and response from 9 different sources in these documents. They all say this person owes them money, blah, blah, blah. It's why, in a story specifically. And so it's just like it's so much work for maybe a much smaller output, but it's like that time does need, like, you don't, otherwise if you don't give people the time though, you don't get those stories. You don't just open up a thing and it's like, this person did this. And it's like, oh cool, the document answered that one page answered everything for me. It was so simple to just fall upon that. And the one thing I'm really curious, and I don't know if we'll ever find out, is who tipped Pablo off to this to begin with. Now, I don't know if they went specifically to, again, the bankruptcy documents of this company and they knowing that Kawhi had this contract. I don't know. I know the Clippers had to deal with this company specifically and stuff like that, which is why when Adam Silver's like, I'm not familiar with that company. It's like, you're not familiar with a company that like is in agreement with one of your franchises? Okay, you're full of shit.
Which he clarified today, by the way, after Pablo put out a tweet this morning about the same thing, going, oh, well, Adam Silver said he'd never heard of this. Well, here's this documentation and this. And then I was like, well, I just meant about the fraud part of it. I didn't know about this. It's like, that's not what you said the first time. Even if it's what you meant, it is not what you said.
Yeah.
And boy, in the era where we have smartphones and constant videos of anybody, am I sick and fucking tired of, oh, you didn't have the context for this, or this didn't happen with that, when you have the exact receipts of them in their own voice with their own fucking face saying the thing that they then say they didn't say. So to your point, yes, this is another example of like, do I believe that Adam Silver had a total knowledge of this before that episode dropped? No. He's the commissioner of a league that handles billions of dollars. Every single like sponsorship deal is not going to come all the way up to his level. But then when the company was found for fraud, I'd like to think that was brought to his level. And if it wasn't, he has issues to address within the NBA about why it wasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't just hand wave all that away.
And so that's where my curiosity is like, someone kind of had to tell Pablo, even if they didn't tell him exactly what it was, or Pablo's team or whoever, someone stumbled across it and was like, hey, you might want to just glance at this.
Yep.
I've had that happen to me. I've had people who didn't want to be named and didn't want to know how I got it, that didn't want me to then lead people back to them. And were like, did you check this lately? I've gotten that text a handful of times. Did you check this thing lately? Did you check these filings lately? Just go look at it.
I'm sitting on one right now. I won't talk about a single detail about it. I won't give anything away that could possibly, but I'm sitting on one right now that was brought to my attention a few days ago that we're going to have to figure out what to do with eventually if it ends up being true. Right this minute, I'm sitting on one of those types of tips where it was like, hey, I don't know that I can be identified, but here's something that you should check out. I'm not going to say the linchpin of this industry. I think our own investigative work is the first and most prominent bit of that. But without little tips from whistleblowers or people that have been scorned, a lot of these stories never see the light. So you're right. And with how many aspiration employees were willing to come forward, it certainly seems like that could be the place to start.
Probably. It's probably the place of, and why they thought he would be interested or he was whatever. And again, it's 7 months ago. So it's well before he's done anything else recently that would have like popped him up as the guy to come talk to, and he'll look into it, which right now, I wouldn't be surprised now if there's scorned, upset people about not necessarily anything to do with this, but just drama in sports in general. He might be the place to go. That's what Deadspin was online for a long time.
Yeah.
They're the ones that busted that Manti Te'o's girlfriend wasn't a real human being because someone went to them and were like, hey guys, kind of know about this and it's kind of weird. You want to look into it? You have the resources more than I do. And that's what leads things to another thing. Like, someone over there might have been like, hey, Pablo, you like to be an investigative sports journalist. You might be able to take this and go somewhere with it. And he did. And I wouldn't be surprised. And however many months from now, there's a new thing. And Pablo might just for a while here be the one that's kind of the person in charge of this. And we really need it. So that's great.
You're right. Like, we need it. I imagine the idea of journalists brought a president down 50 years ago, like to a point where literally a president resigned because of journalism. And the fact is, corruption has to be found out and sought out. And vigilance is so important and key, because otherwise you allow the people that our generation and younger despises so much, the billionaires, to control even more. The money is important, obviously, but the fact of if you can work by your own rules and with no oversight and no probing into what you're doing, that gives even more power to these people beyond what money gives. So this type of stuff is more important in society than ever before, I think.
Well, what's funny too is I agree, but look, we're all sports fans. longtime listeners of the show know that this is the case. In some ways, sports are like the ultimate meritocracy. It is supposed to be a level playing field, and if you're the most, it doesn't matter, like, people can be more gifted athletically. Michael Phelps is going to dominate other swimmers because of his genes, his whatever. But at the end of the day, he just happens to be really good at swimming, so he wins all the gold medals. If the Thunder win a championship, it's because they were smart and they were savvy and they rebuilt really well, and they got a bunch of draft picks that they got from the Kawhi Leonard situation when they traded for Paul George. But let's not talk about that. That's too many rabbit holes, too many. But the point is, the idea is once you step on the field, whatever got you to that point, yeah, some teams might butcher the salary cap and have a bad roster, and some teams might really find nuggets of joy within them and bargains and sneak a really good team together. But whatever the case is, it's supposed to be level, which is why we can then invest in rooting for a team so much because, hey, my team's 1-30. We could win a title this year. Well, the more you stack the deck against them with a situation like this, the more that facade crumbles. And that's without even talking about the sports betting angle. We've talked it to death. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole now. But the point is, there's more factors than just fandom at play here. Now you're risking bookies getting involved because it's different than like Malik Beasley or just any athlete in general who might be throwing a game or referee or whatever. Now it's like that was like maybe one game that you influenced the outcome of. You're talking about the systemic problems that could plague seasons with something like this. Not just an individual game where you could convince somebody to throw an under to just get a specific outcome. Now you're talking about problems that plague you for the better part of a decade, and that's a huge issue for the league.
It makes you almost, I don't want to say value, but understand the reasoning of something like the Premier League or Major League Baseball, how it used to be a little bit of, yeah, some teams got more money, and that's just how it's going to go. And we're really not going to govern it because at that point, if we try to govern it, they're just going to go around the rules. So, all right, Manchester City, Man United, you're just going to win more because you have more money. And it makes, in a way, it almost makes sports fun when a team like, was it Luton Town a few years ago won the Premier League and everyone's like, holy shit, how did that happen? Or Leicester, I think it was maybe.
Yeah,
Leicester. Yeah. When that team won, it was like, how did this possibly happen? How did you beat because then it allows, the teams with money sometimes can become complacent, and then that's more fun in sports. So I don't think that's the right solution. I prefer, like Chris said, the ultimate meritocracy where everyone has a level playing field, but it lends credence to that idea, right? Where it's like, all right, everyone can just do what they want. And if you've got more, you can win, but then it makes it way more fun when the underdog wins.
And it doesn't always work. I mean, the Yankees have won one title in the last 25 years. And they're consistently one of the highest payrolls in baseball. The Dodgers have increased their spending lately, and they have some results to show for it. But it's not like they're a shoo-in every year. People thought they were guaranteed to win the World Series coming into this season because of their ludicrous offseason. And, well, they've been a little bit more hampered by injuries than most. It doesn't matter. Like, they had the depth to weather it more than most teams, and they're still basically floundering around the NL West right now. They're going to make the playoffs. They might still win the title. But the point is, it wasn't like, oh, that team's going to be like a Seattle Mariners in 01. They're going to win like 120 games. Nope. Doesn't work that way. So you can't just solve things with money. And as we saw from the Clippers, it didn't fucking work either. Now, that's where my bias comes in because I hated that team when we played them in the Western Conference Finals. And Kawhi wasn't there, mind you. But hated them when we played them in the first round a couple years ago. So I can be honest and be like, yeah, I'm not a fan of the Clippers as a whole, but most of the people that I hated on that team, like, say, a certain Morris, a certain Beverly, a certain Rondo, players that I do not like all happen to be around there at the same time. So I don't really have an axe to grind with them anymore. Like, Kawhi is still there, but that's pretty much it. Even the guys who have been around for a little while, like a Norman Powell, have gone now. I guess Zubats is still there, but he wasn't there the first time they made a deep run. So, like, I don't really care. I don't have anything against Steve Ballmer specifically myself. And yet I look at this and I'm like, I hope the league hammers them because you have to set a precedent here or else you're going down a very dangerous road.
Isn't the problem, too, that just the basic function of how the sport is played, basketball is more susceptible to being this being a, to your point, Chris, of Dodgers gave Shohei a contract where it's a shit ton of deferred money and they're the only ones that can just give a bunch of money and promise to give it to the future and blah, blah, blah. It's just how their ownership structure works and where their money comes from and all that. Anyone could have signed into that contract, but the Dodgers did it, and it's a weird function of how it works. But in basketball, making sure you have like 3 really good players, I get that it doesn't ensure you the title, but as we've seen, it's like, it's probably more certain that if you have 3 good players of the 9 that play, 3 good players on a 26-man baseball team or 3 good players on a 53-man NFL team, it works a little differently. This is the league where it's like the big picture players that if you do give them the bonus money, if you can convince them to stick around, it does keep you more competitive. It does set you up. And again, the Clippers have had that incentive, opening a new arena, wanting to make sure that they're competitive and not a bottom dweller as they open this billion-dollar place. Basketball just seems like it is the danger zone for this more than anything. We've talked about it with betting. That player can influence the game and props more specifically than a fucking lineman can in the NFL. Guy can miss a block and let his quarterback get sacked, but that's one fucking play. Like, he can't guarantee it. He also can get pulled out of the game if he gives up 3 sacks. Basketball, you only play so many guys and reckless plays here and there. And so Kawhi getting this or any player getting benefits or blah, 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 or why guys go where they go and keeping that structure around, that's the league where it's a little more dangerous just on the basics of that's how basketball is played. It just has 5 guys on the court. There's 9 guys, 8 guys that play in the playoffs. Like, it just feels worse, I guess, that this could be happening in this sport specifically as opposed to the others.
Well, this is game basketball centric, but doesn't that mean that we really need to? To me, it means we need to get rid of the player max contract and just be like, look, guys, you have a salary cap, work under it, you can pay 1 player whatever you want. Like,
yes,
because someone like LeBron James would have been making $75-80 million a year with no issue.
Yeah,
but he's now given a reason. Someone like Kawhi Leonard, someone like LeBron James, Kevin Durant, those major players who are so influential because of the scarcity that you just mentioned, Cody. Now all of a sudden they're hampered and they're not being paid their actual market value. As weird it is to say that someone deserves $80 million a year to play basketball, that's besides the point. The fact is they're not getting paid their market value, so they're going to recoup that some way, somehow. That's what businessmen, that's what powerful people do, is recoup their value somehow, some way. And you're going to get into shady stuff like this when that happens.
If you effectively have 2 salary caps in the NBA, you have a salary cap for the team and you have a salary cap for the players. The players can only make X amount of money of the salary cap. I could be wrong, but I don't believe the NHL operates that way. I definitely know the NFL does not operate that way. They are the quarterbacks are at the freedom to eat up as much of the cap as they would like to. If LeBron's able to make $100 million of a $200 million cap, and the fucking Orlando Magic want to give him that money and they want to build small pieces around him, why the fuck not let people operate that way? That's more of a free market inside the cap. The NBA, it's a great point, Dave. I've always thought about it in that sense, but you saying it out like that in this situation now, it's like, you're right, that is fucking weird. And I get that it causes some problems for team building and people can run into some problems. But also, well, if an owner fucks up his team and screws it up that way, then you're in a hole for 4 years.
That's free market, baby.
That's free market.
That's free market, baby.
That's why this company went bankrupt. It's free market. They fucked up.
The argument used to make some sense in the idea that it was like, well, the players' union might not fight for that because you would lose those medium-range contracts.
We already did.
If there's too many, but guess what has happened because of these apron changes and everything else? Now we've talked about it. We've spent a whole episode on it.
Exactly.
Oh, you have 3 max contracts? Well, then you have veteran minimums across the rest of the roster. So now there's even less reason to have something like that in place because of the other CBA differences that have happened over the years. And by the way, remember Ilya Kovalchuk?
Yes. New Jersey Devils contract, correct?
Yes. I was going to say, I know Cody will.
The fact that he later signed with the Kings, I'm very familiar with this player.
Ilya Kovalchuk signed a 17-year, $102 million contract. I think he was already 7 or 8 years into his career at that point.
Yes. He was never
hockey
going to
players can go pretty deep. We saw Jaromir Jagr play till he was like 48. But still, the point was he signed that, and the league was like, that salary cap circumvention. They actually used those terms at that time. This was probably almost 20 years ago now. So they ended up going to a 15-year, $100 million contract because that's so different. 17-102, 15-100. Yes, the AAV is slightly different, but not enough where it's like, that feels like picking nits, right? The last thing I want to say is this. I want to say 2 things. First, if this story intrigued you at all, you should go watch the first Pablo Torre episode. I know it's 80 minutes, and that's a tough ask in the age of TikTok videos that are 20 seconds. But if you thought this sounded interesting, go watch that in full, especially as the reveals happen. It's interesting. The second point is this. This does not absolve Kawhi Leonard of his wrongdoing in this. A lot of the wrath from fans has been focused on the Clippers. How do you punish the Clippers? What should you do to the Clippers? Do you take away draft picks? Well, that's thorny because they owe half their draft picks to the Thunder still the next 3 years. But fine, sure, we got to punish them with draft picks. You can't really find them because Ballmer's made out of Oogle bucks. So, like, if you find them, it's going to be a drop in the bucket, just like the $50 million he threw away on aspiration was. So how do you punish the Clippers?
Cost of doing business.
But you also have to punish Kawhi Leonard for 2 reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One, because you can't have players or their negotiators trying to get these type of deals on the side either. That's also bad for the league. But also because you can't have the team get punished, like say they void his contract. Now Kawhi Leonard's a free agent. So you're going to let 29 of the teams besides the Clippers benefit? Like if the Suns got Kawhi Leonard on a veteran's minimum because of that situation, I would be appalled. I would laugh. It would help us. It would never happen. But I would also be like, this is horrible. This is an awful look for the league. You can't have this happen because now it's like, well, let's just say the Thunder, who won a title last year, are bringing back all their young core. And they're like, oh, sure, we can free up. Like, Isaiah Joe, you're a nice player, but you know what you're not? Kawhi Leonard. So you have to punish Kawhi. You have to punish his uncle Dennis, who's ridiculous, who made the same demands of the Raptors after Kawhi was a 1-year rental there and won a title with them in 2019. So my last point is this. People are looking for a smoking gun. They are basically looking for the equivalent of Steve Ballmer texting Kawhi Leonard and being like, I'm going to hook you up with somebody on the side, LOL. That doesn't fucking exist. Unless Steve Ballmer is actually the biggest moron on the planet. There is zero chance that that level of a smoking gun exists. That's not a smoking gun. That's a smoking fucking bazooka. What we do have here is about 11 different sources of smoke, all just billowing out in plumes at the same time. And to me, again, as a journalist, can I say that this all happened with certainty? No. But as additional details keep coming up and coming up, I think you're forced to look at this with some skepticism and say, even in the best case scenario where Ballmer actually had no idea, he still has to be held accountable because it happened underneath his watch. And you get to these CEO high-level positions. And the one thing that I can say with certainty from having run a newspaper is that you get to any level of these type of leadership positions, the buck stops with you. That's why you get paid more than some of your contemporaries, because at the end of the day, whatever Cody does, it's going to come back to me eventually. If he goes and like backhands a city council member, I'm going to hear about that eventually, and I'm going to have to explain it, even though I had nothing to do with that. That's not an apples-to-apples example here, but all I'm saying is, like, even if you read into this as favorably as possible, all the money is extremely suspicious, and there's so many details we didn't even get to because it's only an hour podcast. I don't want to bore you, but, the only other co-owner of the Clippers is Ballmer's best friend and roommate from college. He has a 1% stake in the team. He invested $2 million in aspiration as they were going through bankruptcy proceedings, and then they paid Kawhi $1.75 million on a deferred payment 9 days after that happened. Those things happened. Was there a direct connection? We don't know. But those 2 things happened. It looks horrible. His daughter worked for aspiration at the time when they were going bankrupt. A simple little phone call from one of these other really rich guys might have been like, hey, how's the company doing? Bad. We're going bankrupt. We can't pay our employees. We're going through mass layoffs right now. Here's $2 million. Why not? Seems like a good investment. So all I am asking is for people out there who are skeptical, and boy, is there skepticism in today's media landscape. Just sometimes a spade is a spade. Sometimes you can look at something that looks like a thing, and it is just that. There isn't a conspiracy behind it. There's no tinfoil hats. It can be as simple as all the evidence pointing at one conclusion, and you can go, yeah, that could happen.
It's a shame that it just, with the skepticism thing, exists in general. Again, what does Paulo have to gain here? He does this work,
his own,
and if you think that he has
his own,
let's say he has him in a game. Let's say you're a conspiracy theorist and you believe, oh well, if he does this, he's going to get more attention. Everyone's going to follow him. It's like he did the thing, and you're all so insane you don't believe him right now. So even if he's lying, he's not gaining anything because you don't even believe him in the first place. So the conspiracy that you're claiming would happen, we're going through the motions of it happening, and the majority of you think he's a lying piece of shit, and you're like, well, I never going to listen to him or believe him anyways. So how many more listeners is he getting for this? Like, he has nothing to gain from going and doing these things other than saying, I grew up and I wanted to be a journalist. I'm now a journalist. I cover sports. Sports doesn't get covered with a magnifying glass very well anymore. I can fill that void because it's the right thing to do. It's insane to people, I'm sure. Some people actually just think the right thing to do is the right thing to do. That does still technically exist, as bonkers as it might seem in this like clout gaining fucking space. That's not what he's doing. Like, again, I've listened to Pablo for a long time, seen him around a home for a long time. He's one of the few where if I see this report, and I think I texted to you guys without even listening to it yet because I saw Pablo Torre's name attached, and my gut goes, shit, there's probably something to that. And so I pass it along right away. I don't sort through it and then be like, I don't know if this is legit. When for example, the Luka trade happened, I found it on Twitter and I text you guys. I'm like, is this real? Was my response. I text you guys this one and it was like, shit. And that was like, that's all I had.
It's funny you mention the idea of just doing something because it's right. Why else do anything? Like, sometimes this is getting existential, but like sometimes you think about your job. It's like, why am I pushing these buttons on this computer? What's the point? Oh, to get a paycheck. Okay, to get a pay. Okay, but why does my role exist? Oh, because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Like journalism, whether you're running a company, whether you're providing a service to someone, or whether you're overseeing people, it's something that has value, and you should do it. So the idea that Pablo Torre is someone who sees something and says, "Hey, there's something that is going on that needs to be corrected or that the public needs to know about." Oh no, he did it for his own gain. Well, no fucking shit, he did it for his own gain. He did it for both. You can do two things. You can get your notoriety and make a bunch of money off of being an investigative journalist at the same time because you're good at what you do. There's nothing wrong with that either.
How dare he take a paycheck for anything? Oh my God. And again, we get that in journalism at times too. It's like, well, you guys are just trying to start shit so people will read papers. I'm like, motherfuckers, you barely read papers anyways. That's actually part of our problem. I'm actually trying to find things of interest to you, so maybe you will read my stories and pay to read it. I actually, honestly, work really fucking hard going through things around town. I'm not gonna lie, probably a quarter of my work week for my role at the paper right now includes looking around for shit that I'm like, oh, I bet people would want to know more about that. No, there's nothing nefarious, dude. I'm not giving favoritism to anyone. I'm thinking for the greater grand group of people, I have a brain and I understand this town well. Again, Pablo Torre, he has a brain. He understands sports fandom well. He thought this might be of interest, so then he spends 7 months on it. It's just unbelievable. The skepticism we've got and where we've come in the last, 2 decades, I think. Probably, honestly, it's easy to point out. It's probably since 9/11, truthfully, like where we got really conspiracy. Then we always have had it with big news things that have happened. 9/11 really triggered the let's all be really, really conspiracy theorist about things that there is literally video footage of, and we're still not going to fucking believe it. And it's just, we've gotten to it, and it has infected it into every essence of everything, which is, again, honestly, where at times sports fandom's not really as fun as it used to be, because that's a big part of it. It's just like everyone thinks everything is out to get them or whatever, when sometimes spade's a spade. It is what it is right in front of you, and there's nothing more to it than that.
And now we have AI deepfakes. We have,
next.
Now there's even some reason to be skeptical of video proof.
To be fair,
so
that's true.
This is also an ever-evolving landscape, so it's never that simple. I would love to go into some of the things I've learned over the last 2 decades, and whether it's 3 years from now or 30 years from now when I'm done in this industry, and if we still have a podcast then, 30 is a tough ask, but who knows. I'd love to talk more about it. The one thing I'll say is this. There was nothing more frustrating than a few years ago. We had 2 stories that I thought perfectly exemplify what we're talking about here. One of them is still a top 5 story as far as view count in my entire time running this, which is now 7.5 years. And it was the Sister Wives, the TLC show, when they got a house in Flagstaff. That I think was 200 words and a photo provided by TLC. But because it was coming from the local newspaper and people had all this interest in the Sister Wives, it got a ton of clicks. There was an inmate who died in the county jail that year. And people spent hours trying to get the redacted reports and the footage from the video cameras in the jail, and then having to watch that, which is effectively having to watch a man die, and having to pour through all this and ask tough questions to the jail administrators and county officials and all this. That story probably had 2 to 3 months of work put into it. So not even the 7 of Pablo's here. Barely got clicked on and got forgotten. And that's human nature. I'm not even trying to be like, oh, I don't understand. We have short attention spans. They're getting shorter by the minute. But when I look back on that, I'm like, well, then why did we bother? And the only answer is because it was the right thing to do. That's the only thing we can keep coming back to, because it didn't make sense from an ROI perspective. It sure as hell didn't. But it's because that's what our jobs are. Our jobs are not really to document the sister wives. Plenty of other things are going to do that. Our job is to be there for when somebody may have died under uncertain circumstances in the jail and to follow that thread as much as we can. And that sucks because it's a lot easier just being a clout chaser, as Cody said.
Yep. I hope it keeps happening, though, because we need this. It's what we need in our society, and with people and their short attention spans and their desire to seek out that next dopamine hit, it's so easy to be manipulated at that point. So we need to keep people in power in check, and this is the way to do it.
The NBA has hired a pretty powerful and expensive law firm, a reputable one, to look into this further. It's interesting because a lot of their work is kind of already done. Obviously, they need to do that independently, but still, like, the breadcrumbs have already been picked up. There's just a loaf now, just an entire loaf of bread being like, interesting.
The one thing they're going to have to do is sit Kawhi down and make him answer them. No one else can do that but the league that employs him in a way. Like, no journalist is going to get Kawhi to sit down and answer, what the fuck was this? Did you know what was going on? Why didn't you ever, like, do anything for the thing? That's honestly the one thing, like, Pablo can't do. Kawhi's never going to talk to him. The league has the power. And again, I'd be fascinated if Kawhi tells the league to go fuck themselves and never talks to them. Well, then we get to Chris's point of,
Which, by the way,
you can't really plead the fifth on this one.
Yep. Then let's subpoena him, at that point.
Maybe. And by the way, we didn't mention this up top because people who know the NBA know, but Kawhi Leonard, for the non-NBA fans, is the most reclusive star in sports. Because even a guy like Nikola Jokic, who is a bit weird and kind of has his own interests, like he loves horses and stuff, he doesn't really care as much about other stuff, but he still does his interviews. He still, makes time for the media. Kawhi has always been reclusive. He's always been penny pinching, and it turns out that that's why. Again, I don't want to go into all the details. We're wrapping up. I just want to tell you that if you don't understand the levels of this story, just go find the video and watch it. Because we're talking about a man who, like, if you could pick maybe the worst candidate to be somebody you paid a bunch of money to promote your company, you might consider Kawhi Leonard. Yeah, New Balance got a couple of commercials out of him for a large endorsement deal where there were stipulations about, a return on what we're putting into you. So the idea of giving him all this money, of all people, and giving a quarter that to Robert Downey Jr. is just like, all right, gang. If you think that's true, then I don't know what we're doing here.
Again, especially this company and not a shoe company.
Yep.
What the fuck did this company have to gain by going to Kawhi Leonard? What is he passionate about? Whatever they do. Like, I literally to this day barely understand what their profit was supposed to be. It was like the underpants gnomes thing of company blank profit. I do not understand.
That's the thing, though.
What this company was supposed to make money.
We don't know what he's passionate about at all,
because no one knows anything about him or what he likes other than maybe money.
And this company decided that his contract was for him to like things on social media because he's such a big social media presence. Right. Clearly, like, people follow.
And again, I made the Jokic joke, but if Budweiser wanted to sponsor Nikola Jokic and do a thing with the Clydesdales because he likes horses, I'd be like, okay, that's kind of weird, but sure. Like, he likes horses. It's one of the few things I know about him, but he loves his horses. He loved it when his horse winning a title more than him winning a title.
It is funny for it's advertising 101. Like, any person could look at it and be like, that's weird. Why would you sign him to a contract? Like,
and by the way, the only other stipulation in that contract, besides all the ones that had easy outs for a morality clause that didn't really have to be enforced, was that he stay on the LA Clippers.
Oh.
The only other stipulation. And even that's not unheard of in contracts. Obviously, if you're sponsored by one bank and you trade a player to another team and they're sponsored by another bank, it wouldn't be the best look if they were still promoting the bank that you have a partnership with. So that's not unheard of, but for that to be the only enforceable part of the contract is another one of the 8 million things here where you're just like, okay, sure. Yeah, you can believe one of them, but when there's 400 of them, you have to go,
It is interesting when the Clippers have a contract that it enforces Kawhi to play for the Clippers. And then this company had a contract that enforces Kawhi to play for the Clippers. So it's kind of like the same contract in a weird way. And the only work he has to do
In
is
addition to,
keep being a basketball player. Technically, that's really, in a way, if he had an out, to Chris's point, of everything else on that contract, the only thing he had to do was play basketball for the Clippers. Well, that sounds like it was a contract to play basketball for the Clippers, I think is what I have stumbled upon here.
well, and Kawhi has been almost in breach of that contract of actually playing basketball for the Clippers every year the past few years. So,
true.
he's barely on the Clippers anyway.
Yeah. The aspiration part of this has been, made fun of as a no-show contract, effectively. It's a term that's used in the industry. But then people have made plenty of jokes about him not showing on the court either.
Yeah.
So, anyways, a lot to talk about, especially because, again, we have different perspectives on this than most might. We don't have insider stuff like a lot of the podcasts you've seen in the last couple of weeks. If you've been following this story, there's NBA insiders, some of which have had interesting insights, some of which have kind of been pandering for the league and the Clippers, as Cody mentioned. But in this particular case, it's something that we all have some familiarity with because we work in fields kind of like this. So to me, it seemed like an easy topic, and lo and behold, here we are more than an hour in. And it's about time to wrap up. As Siri barks at something passing by outside.
Protecting you.
For now, it's just a little woof. Oh, nope. Hey.
It could be Kawhi
I
Leonard.
couldn't stop it. It spilled over.
It's Pablo Torre about to drop some stuff on us, actually. He's got dirt on us. So.
Hey. Can't stop her. She's too powerful.
All right, well, you should just end the show now.
Guess we have to end the show.
Yeah, call it.
That's the end of the episode. In between episodes, you can find us on our website, grayareas.live or youtube.com/@grayareaslive. I'm sorry for the dog, but she can't be stopped. We'll see you next time.